So just while we're waiting for that system to set up, I just want to thank everybody for coming today. And it's going to be a very interesting information session. Paige is a member of the Relationship and Sexuality Working Group, and she is going to be talking today about an introduction to consent. So she's just getting sorted out there. And just a reminder that next week's session is with Marcus Ward. He is also a member of the Relationship and Sexuality Working Group, and he will be talking about, or he will be examining the effects of spina bifida on sexuality. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Paige, and I'm going to be quiet. So thank you very much for giving up the time today, and really appreciate it.
Lovely, thanks, Katie. Can everyone see my big screen? Should just be the slide up there. Katie, are you able to see that?
I can see the screen. I can see it perfectly, and I've just put it in, and the one person has come back to say yes. So no back to say no. So that's always good.
Great. That's a good start. Technology is working. Okay, so like Katie said, this is an introduction to consent. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Paige Parker. I'm one of the family support workers with Spina Bifida Hydrocephalus Ireland. And the reason I am here and giving this today is because, like Katie said, I'm part of the working group, and I've always been interested in the topic of sexuality and relationships. So last year I did the foundation program in sexual health promotion with the HSC, and since then I've become a trainer in Foregro's Real You program and the Rape Crisis Centre's Body Right program. And for my sins, I am currently doing a grad cert in DCU in sexuality and sexual health promotion. So today I have drawn from all of these programs and experiences, and also my own experience of working within SPHI and living life and having to consent to things. And I'm going to bring it all together into this short presentation just to give you a brief overview. And really the focus is going to be on how consent works in practice rather than on all the heavy theoretical stuff. So the aims of today, what I'd like you to come away with, is to know what is consent. And how that ties into communication, what good communication around consent looks like, and then the legal stuff. And don't worry, this is just going to be a slide or two, just a brief overview, just so that you have an idea. I mean, we could do a whole 2-hour presentation on that, but I think it's good to start at the start. And just before we go, I'm going to refer to sex throughout, and I want you just to remember sex to everyone means something different. So the meaning within today is any intimacy with a partner. Excuse me. So that's anything from kissing and holding hands to penetrative sex and everything in between. So when I'm talking and I say sex, you know, don't just take that to mean sex in the traditional sense. That you should always give consent, even if it's non-sexual, in every situation in life. And Katie has already mentioned this, and I think she shared it in the chat, but sometimes this topic can bring up uncomfortable feelings. It can be really difficult to talk about, so it's helpful to reach out to a friend or family member if you feel comfortable doing that. The support's there as well. And also you can always reach out to your family support worker. And Katie, I won't be able to see the chat throughout this, but you can privately message Katie, I believe. So if you need to reach out in that way, or if it becomes too much, feel free to leave. You can always watch the recording. So those are the numbers again. Sorry, I promise I don't have coronavirus. Just me being really nervous and having to talk. So I apologize if I keep coughing. Hopefully it will stop. So what is consent? While if I ask you now and put you on the spot, you might have a rough idea. Sometimes it's actually easier to think about a time when you didn't consent or someone didn't ask for your consent. So if you think about a time, so like a really easy example, if you're a wheelchair user, is someone coming along and pushing your wheelchair without asking you first. It could be when you're at the carvery and someone lumps on a load of mash or pours gravy over your lovely dinner and you're like, hey, I didn't ask for that. So it can feel like anything from infuriating, frustrating, insulting. It can feel like they're treating you like a child. It can even be scary. If you take the example of someone pushing your wheelchair without consent, you're suddenly out of control, possibly being wheeled across a road. And that's a terrible, terrible experience. And not to make you all think of terrible things and times in your life, but just to be aware of the impact of consent outside the bedroom, outside of a sexual context, just to put this all into perspective. So this is what the law says. A person consents to a sexual act if he or she freely and voluntarily agrees to engage in that act. And the three key parts here I've underlined is the sexual act, because what we're talking about today, and the freely and voluntarily agrees. So that means free from coercion, force, anything like that. And that act is specifically that act. So that we're not talking about several different acts. We're talking about one specific act, whatever that act is that you're engaged in at that time. So, consent. I'm just going to pause and get a drink for a second, sorry. Consent should be fries. So what do I mean by this? Planned Parenthood, it's an organization in America, breaks it down really well. They define it as freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. So over the next few slides, we're going to look at examples of this, and I'd like you just to think of examples in your own life as well, and to just think about what it actually means in practice. So freely given. It's not okay to pressure, trick, or threaten someone into saying yes, and you can't give consent if you're drunk, high, or passed out. You can see my little banning of Cupid down below. You can't make someone fall in love with you. You can't make them love you. You can't make them do a sexual act with you. And if you do that, it is not consent. So, I mean, if you take an example of someone in your life that you depend on for something. So say in times of COVID, there's someone who drops in your shopping to you every week. And suddenly they say to you, well, I'm going to stop dropping in your shopping unless you do something. A non-sexual example might be, unless you start giving me a tip if you pay me for that service. It's something I've been doing for free as your friend, but now I'm going to pressure and trick you into saying this because I know that you need this thing. And the same thing can happen in a sexual circumstance. If you're relying on someone or something, they can use that as leverage and power over you. It also comes into things like if someone has gotten you drunk and then you've said yes, that wasn't freely given. If their intent was to get you drunk, so it was easier to make you say yes, then that's manipulation. And also, if someone has protested in any way at all, then it is not freely given. And that includes people's body language, any sort of protesting or verbal response. And it can also be saying nothing at all. So reversible. It's okay to say yes and then change your mind at any time, even if you've both done it before and even if you're both naked in bed. So that can mean if you had a great time with someone last week and then this week rolls around and they're asking you to do the same thing again, it is perfectly okay just to say no. And it doesn't matter, like they say, if you're both naked in bed, it can have gone that far. And your response can be anything from the birdie leaving the branch. You can just leave the situation. If you feel safe and comfortable to do so, you can turn around and say to the person, no, I don't feel like it. I'd rather not do that, or make a suggestion of something you want to do instead. And we're going to look at more communication later and ways to approach this. So, informed. You can only consent to something if you have all the facts. For example, if someone says they'll use a condom and then they don't, there isn't full consent. And I've given an example down below of my little birdies. So if you're with someone on Monday night and they say to you, Paige, you're the only one for me, you're the only person I'm seeing, and you leave, and then Wednesday night rolls around, they're with someone else, Saturday night rolls around, they're with someone else, and you come back to them on Monday and they don't tell you about Wednesday and Saturday night. That's not informed consent. And this is really important because if you're in a committed relationship with someone and you're not using a barrier method of contraception, so a condom, for example, then you could then be at increased risk of a sexually transmitted infection. And this applies to many other aspects. People need to be honest with you if you're having any sort of sexual relationship with that person. Enthusiastic. And this is my favorite one, and this is the one I take for everything in my life. When it comes to sex, you should do stuff you want to do, not things people expect you to do. If someone doesn't seem enthusiastic, meaning happy and excited or energized, stop and check in. So if you think about all the expectations that are put on us from a young age, like if you think about when you go to your granny's house or some friend of your parents when you were growing up and they were like, oh, you're so cute and lovely, give me a hug. And you're like, I'd rather do anything than hug you right now. And you're told, no, the polite thing to do is to hug. So we learn from a very young age that it's actually polite to say yes. And that as adults, I mean, part of being an adult is doing stuff we don't want to do. You know, not everyone loves going to work every day, but we have to do it. And we have to do stuff we don't want to do necessarily. But with sex, it's different. If there is even a little hair on your baby finger that doesn't want to do something, then you need to stop and say no. And it's also really important that if you pick up on the person you're with being like, not that into it, then you have a responsibility to make sure that they're really into it. And it could be something simple, like they're really stressed after a long day in work and they're not really in the mood. And it could just be a 20-minute chat about whatever it's bothering them at work, and then you can go back to having a great old time. Or maybe you leave it to another night. So specific. Saying yes to one thing, like going to the bedroom to make out, doesn't mean you're saying yes to other things, like having sex. So this is really, really important, and this is actually referred to in Irish law of when they say that act, because you cannot take consent for one thing. So if I said to you, you know, this presentation is happening, please come along, I'd love you to watch and join in, and then suddenly you turn up and I make you the presenter and make you give the presentation, that's not consent. You haven't consented to that specific thing. You've consented to turning up and watching, but not giving the presentation. So this is a really important thing. So just because you're kissing or, you know, you're cuddling on the couch, whatever it is, doesn't mean that it has to go any further. And they can't say to you, but you said you wanted to do X. Yes, you said you wanted to kiss. That didn't mean you wanted to have sex necessarily. Maybe it did. So every time something new comes along, you need to check in and make sure you have consent for that. So pause for a drink. Consent and communication. This is quite a tricky one sometimes. It's something that people can use to not ask because they're like, I don't want to, I don't know how. So we're going to break that down a little bit and hopefully make it a bit easier for you all. So it can feel scary, awkward, you can feel vulnerable, and just generally you can be really uncomfortable because what if you ask and they say no? No one likes to be rejected. It is not a great feeling. So what's the best way to ask? What way can we set ourselves up for success? To start with, try texting your partner instead of waiting till you're face-to-face and it's really intense and you're like, oh, I'm so nervous. I And what if they say no? And what if I'm upset? Or, you know, what if they react badly? Sometimes a really nice way to do that is just send a little text earlier on in the day. And we're going to look at an example of that in the next slide. Picking a neutral space, not waiting until you're in the bedroom or, you know, cuddling on the couch, maybe when you're having dinner together or out for a walk, or in the car. You can bring it up then. Say, hey, I was wondering about trying this thing later. What do you think? And it just takes a bit of the pressure off and you're less vulnerable because, one, you're not naked. That makes every conversation harder in my experience. And it should just make it a little bit safer as well if you're not sure how they're going to react if it's a new partner. Naming it can make a massive difference. The second I mentioned earlier on, I was like, oh, I'm coughing a lot. I'm really nervous. Straight away, I felt better. I was like, oh, yeah, that's what it is. That's why I'm coughing. And I can just carry on. So sometimes just saying to your partner, hey, I'm really, really nervous. I don't really know how to bring this up. But there's this thing that I want to try, or, hey, you know, I really like you and I want to take this further. And chances are they're going to turn around and be like, I really want that too. Or I was a bit nervous. I didn't know how to bring it up either. I'm really glad that you did. And then you can have a conversation and get rid of the old awkward turtle. And then just practice. Practice doesn't make perfect. That is nonsense. I practiced a lot of things in my life and I'm still rubbish at them, but they do get easier. I think I'm remembering back to the first time I gave a presentation, I didn't sleep for 3 months beforehand. Now it's like, oh, this is uncomfortable. I don't like it, but I can do it. So try texting your partner before you meet up. And I'm going to try and read this out without sounding too cringy. And just remember, this is just an example. It's something that you can put your own spin on and use your own words. This is just an example just to break down and see what's in it. So, hey, I can't wait to see you later. I was wondering if you wanted to have sex or just cuddle on the couch. So the important part there is the starting with a positive. I can't wait to see you later. Doesn't matter what we do. I just can't wait to see you. And then there's a suggestion with an option. So I was wondering if you wanted to have sex, and that could be substituted for anything else, or just cuddle on the couch, another option. So then a response could be, cuddles on the couch sound amazing. I'm so tired today, but it'd be fun just to hang out with you. I can't wait to see you either. And because there's not a direct question of, do you want to have sex later? The other person's able to respond in a way that doesn't mean rejection for the other person. They're still saying, yes, I'd like to do one of those things. And they could have not justified that and just said that. And they're ending with a positive as well. I can't wait to see you either. So generally, if you're asking for consent, a good thing to do is to start with this kind of language. Would you like me to? How about we? Are you up for? Are you in the mood to do? Would you like to try? May I? Do you want to? Should we? And all of these are both suggestions and questions need answers. So that's the two kind of things you need to remember. That it has to be a conversation. There's always communication involved. And sometimes when you've been with someone for a long time, there's a lot of non-verbal communication as well. But I think starting out, it's a really good practice to get used to asking these questions and listening for an answer. So you could get a positive answer, and usually we can recognize those fairly well. So I won't go through those. Also for my own cringiness levels, I'd rather not. So what does no sound like? It can be a hard no, something like no, or stop, or I don't want to. Or it could be a soft no, which is not right now. I don't think so. I'd like to cuddle instead. And there's always this thing when you hear debates about consent of like, oh, but they didn't say no. Sometimes, for whatever reason, it could be because of our past, we find it really difficult to say no. And no is a full sentence. No can just be no, the same as stop, but we've been taught From the time we were kids, it's not polite. If someone asks you something, you don't just say no. If someone says, would you like a cup of tea? You're like, no. You say, no, thank you. Or, oh, no, I don't really want one. And they say, oh, go on, sure, have a cup. You're like, oh, okay, I will. And you might sip on it, but you don't really want it. That enthusiasm for that cup of tea isn't there. So sometimes that softer no can be because of politeness. It could be because the other person's scared. What if they upset you? What if they, they really like you? They want you to like them. So rejecting you probably doesn't sound like the best bet for them. So they might be like, I don't think so. And sometimes when we're really scared, a response might be silence. It might be not responding. We might be too scared to actually say no or stop. You might say, and there might be some hesitation. So it's really important if you don't get a, I was going to swear there and I better not because this is recorded, but if you don't get a really enthusiastic, yeah, please, I'd love to do that, then you need to stop and check in. And that's a really, really important thing. So handling rejection. Rejection, it sucks. No one likes to be turned down. I think everyone's had an experience where they put themselves forward in some way, be it for work, for a promotion that was like, no, you didn't get that, or a job, or it can just be, hey, do you want to hang out this weekend? No, I don't want to. And sometimes we don't mind the answer. Sometimes it's like, oh, why don't they want to do that with me? Is it because they don't like me? Is it because they don't have fun doing that thing with me? So it's just important to kind of think about how we feel when we get rejected and also how other people might feel when we reject them. And that knowledge can be really helpful. So if we get a no, how to respond? The first thing I'd say, if your initial instinct is like, what? Why do they not like me? And it's an angry or a defensive response, just take a pause, a deep breath, and think, maybe they are just tired. Maybe they're stressed from work. Maybe it's something else other than they don't like me. They must hate me. So responses that could be really helpful would be, okay, cool. Yes, I'd like that too. If someone makes an alternative suggestion. Similarly, okay, that sounds like fun. No problem. Thanks for sharing. Cool. Do you want to? Is there something else you'd like to do? And no worries. And you can come up with, there's so many different responses. Those are just a little sample to give you an idea. And it's really just saying, I'm okay with your decision. I'm okay with the fact that you don't want to do that. And I want to let you know that. So, with consent, it can be a happily ever after. In the moment, it can feel like, oh, this is so scary. If I say no, they're not going to like me. They're not going to want to be with me. And that might be the case. But at the end of the day, it's better to be on your own and to be safe. And then maybe at some other time, meet someone new who does respect you and listen to when you say no, no matter what way you say it, than to be in a situation where you're unhappy. You can see my little piggy on her own bought herself all the flowers. So yeah, everyone's happily ever after looks different, and it's just important to remember it's not worth sacrificing your own happiness and well-being just to keep other people happy. Now, I am going to try, and I say try, to play this video. I'm actually going to go into the YouTube one. Hang on. Nope, that's not how I do that. Now, Katie, can you just let me know if this plays?
For sure, if someone wants to have sex with me. Well, actually, there's only one way. They need to tell you.
I can hear but not see it.
What?
Sorry, say that again, Katie?
I can hear it but not see it.
Okay. I'll do is just try and go back to this one. Can you see my presentation again now?
No, I just see slideshow and resume slideshow icon up at the top, and the screen is black.
Yeah.
It's not playing a video for somebody else either. That's what one of.
How about there?
Yeah, I can see the video now. Yeah.
Perfect. Ah, go back. Oh, technology.
For sure if someone wants to have sex with me. Well, actually, there's only one way. They need to tell you. You need to have consent. But what does consent really mean? Consent means both parties are really, truly into what's going on. This means that nobody's being guilted or pressured into doing anything. Silence does not equal consent. Some people think it's not rape unless there's fighting, screaming, or someone yelling no. But that's not true. Communication doesn't always happen with words. Body language can say a lot if you pay attention. Are they leaning in or are they pulling away? Do they look happy or do they look uncomfortable? Are they kissing you back or are they just staying kind of still? You have to pay attention to all the signals. This includes body language and words. No one can read minds, so it's always good to talk about it. Asking for consent doesn't have to be awkward. Asking for consent can actually be kind of sexy.
Want to show me your bedroom?
Show me where you want me to touch you.
Do you want to help me take these clothes off?
So, let's break this consent thing way down. 1. Everyone's clear about what's about to happen next, and they're happy about it. If you're making out with someone for the first time and want to go further, check in first.
Gonna take your shirt off.
Want to try something different? 2. Everyone in the situation has to feel free to be able to say no without being pressured or hassled. It's not cool to pressure people into doing stuff they're obviously uncomfortable with, or make them feel bad for saying no or wanting to stop things. Being pushy or manipulative makes for some pretty bad sex. And obviously, if a person is drunk, high, passed out, or asleep, it's not okay to do sexual stuff with them. They can't consent when wasted or unconscious. So doing this is actually rape. 3. Be honest about whether or not you're on birth control, have an STD, or having sex with other people. Wouldn't you want to know that? If you're going to get naked with someone, you have to have trust and honesty. 4. Saying yes to sex once doesn't mean you're saying yes to it forever. It may be tough to pause in the middle of some super sweet action, but your partner has the right to stop at any time. And 5. Sex is all about connections and pleasure, right? If everyone feels respected, sex will be much better for both of you. We all deserve a safe, pleasurable, and awesome sex life. The more respect you show to the other person, the more they'll trust you enough to relax and enjoy. And the more honest you are about what you want and don't want, the better things will go. It's easy to talk about what consent means, but what does it look like in real life? How are we supposed to know for sure how far someone wants to go or if they want to get intimate at all? Check out our other videos for tips on how to do this consent thing right.
Perfect. Okay, so I hope you took something from that. I think he does it in a much smoother, less awkward way than I do it. And if you want to check out Planned Parenthood as well, that's where that video is from. They have some really great resources, both video and on their website. And it's well worth looking at if this is something that you're interested in learning more about. So we're coming towards the end. We're just going to look really briefly now at the legal stuff. We could probably spend about 2 hours on this section alone. you'd probably be bored to tears, maybe you wouldn't. So I'm going to just give you the few things that I think are really important to take away and we'll move on to them now. So at the start, we talked about this. We said a person consents to a sexual act if he or she freely and voluntarily agrees to engage in that act. So we talked about the freely given, which is the freely and voluntarily agreeing to something. And we talked about that act, but all the other bits in between, we didn't really touch on, or we did touch on rather, but aren't included in this definition. So what comes after this definition is all the things that mean a person can't consent. So main one is the age of consent. And the age of consent in Ireland is 17 for any sexual act. So I'm not gonna, I could go into it, and if you want to ask me about it afterwards, I can give you some more information on the different ages for different things. A lot of people think that it's 16, but that's actually the age in England. And around the world it varies, and it's something that if you're going on holidays, you're going to live in Australia for a year or Canada, it's worth knowing what the age of consent is if you're in and around that age, or that you have young people in your life over there. It's good for them to know that information. So consent can't be given when someone is drunk. We mentioned that one already. If they've taken any sort of drugs and they're, what's that word? Forgotten that word. I've said too many words. Basically that their decision making is impaired. When someone is asleep, because you need communication to be able to consent to something. So if someone's asleep, they cannot consent to having sex with you or to doing anything with you other than sleeping next to you. And, you know, they should probably know you're sleeping next to them. Shouldn't just creep into bed and be there when they wake up. And when someone is unlawfully detained. Other examples are when there is force or a threat of force. And this is what the Irish law says. If someone's physical disability prevents them from being able to communicate consent, and that's quite a controversial one. So it could be that for, say, someone who has multiple sclerosis and suddenly their communication is impaired and they do not have control over their hands to be able to type out their answer, there can be a question over whether they can consent or not. And that's probably a conversation for another day because you can get into so many different takes on that. Other ones might be someone is mistaken as to the nature and purpose of the act. We talked about that. It has to be specific. When consent is given by a third party and when they're under the age of 17, people cannot consent. So if you take nothing else away from today, remember that it should be freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific, and you have to be over the age of 17. Thank you for listening and getting this far with me. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. And I'm just going to leave up the next slide, which has all of the support agencies and helplines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paige. That was brilliant. Really, really interesting. And yeah, it should be useful for all of our members, even as a recording. So this presentation, just to let you know, will be available. I will be sending it out. I'll be sending it out shortly after this session, but I will also, it'll be going up on our website so that everybody has access to it when they wish, and it can be shared then. So thank you very much again. And just a reminder that next week, the session is with Marcus Ward, and Marcus will be examining the effects of spina bifida on sexuality. So that too will be a very interesting webinar. So thank you very much again, Paige. I know it's not always easy getting up there and doing these presentations, but it was really worthwhile and brilliant topic. So thank you very much for that.